Welcome to Critical Junction, episode 47. I'm Mark.
I'm Luke.
I'm Jill.
And on January 30th, 2018, Dave Rubin of The Rubin Report released a video entitled, quote, "What is the intellectual dark web?" end quote, a reference to the term coined by mathematician Eric Weinstein following his brother, biologist and evolutionary theorist Brett Weinstein's involvement in a series of protests at Evergreen State College, denouncing a quote-unquote day of absence demonstration where white students and faculty were urged to leave campus. Roughly defined, the IDW refers to a loose-knit group of public intellectuals of differing political persuasions who support free speech and are often vocally critical of identity politics, political correctness, and third-wave feminism, among other topics. The term began to gain traction with more mainstream audiences when Barry Weiss, an editor and staff writer at the New York Times, published an op-ed piece entitled, quote, "Meet the Renegades of the Intellectual Dark Web," end quote, on May 8th, 2018. In it, she defines the IDW as, quote, "a collection of iconoclastic thinkers, academic renegades, and mass media personalities who are having a rolling conversation on podcasts, YouTube, and Twitter, and in sold-out auditoriums that sound unlike anything else happening, at least publicly, in the culture right now. Feeling largely locked out of legacy outlets, they are rapidly building their own mass media channels," end quote. Counted among its members are highly prominent public figures like neuroscientist and philosopher Sam Harris, editor-in-chief of Skeptic magazine Michael Shermer, MMA commenter and podcast host Joe Rogan, British activist and former Islamist extremist Majid Nawaz, and University of Toronto professor and constant thorn in the side of social justice warriors Jordan Peterson, to name but a few. The conversations the members of the IDW are having between themselves and through their various new media outlets or on stage in front of sold-out crowds is, of course, not without controversy, so-called. Sam Harris, for example, a self-described liberal and outspoken critic of Donald Trump, has been labeled a bigot and a racist by the extreme left in their typical reactionary fashion for daring to criticize Islam. Jordan Peterson, of course, has been unequivocally painted as an intolerant pseudo-intellectual for what the left perceive as his running commentary on gender and personal pronouns. And mainstream media outlets like The Guardian have painted the entire group as belonging to the alt-right, saying their ideas are dangerous. So, are the conversations the likes of which are happening on Joe Rogan's hours-long podcast, or on stage between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, truly dangerous? Or is the controversy merely a fabrication or a result of the left's tendency to loudly overreact to opinions with which they disagree? Let's talk about that, shall we?
Yeah. So Luke and I were kind of saying in the car, I guess to state our biases off the bat, that we're kind of in line with the, I guess ideologically speaking, we're in line with this group of people that have adopted that moniker of intellectual
We're
dark
part
web,
of the dark
right?
web, just no one listens to it.
That's it. We're part of the dark web, but nobody gives a fuck.
We're the intellectual deep dark
We're
web.
the shadow web. No one knows.
The dark shadow web.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what we do and a lot of what we say on the show happens to line up with what they're talking about in the conversations that they're having.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that it lines up with them because there's a lot of diversity within them.
Right.
I mean, you're going from complete left wingers like Brett Weinstein to complete right wing,
like Ben Shapiro, for example.
people like Ben Shapiro. Exactly. And actually, maybe we can get into that a little bit later, but I think Ben Shapiro kind of doesn't even fit with them.
Okay, well, yeah, that's an interesting point, which I'd like to talk about. So let's put that on the back burner for now.
Yeah.
Ben on the back burner.
But I think we fit in a certain way with that group of people just because we don't align specifically with either kind of mainstreams of either side of the spectrum. We're not mainstream alt-right. We're not mainstream left.
Yeah, when I say the show aligns with that, I'm talking about the type of conversations that we have.
Right. Yeah.
Are extremely similar to some of the conversations that people like Sam Harris are having, or even Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah.
Ours doesn't come nearly as close to Joe Rogan's podcast in terms of length, but we do have the same type of conversations, which I think.
How long does his cast go? Like, does it go up to 4 hours?
Yeah, I've seen his show go on for like 3-4 hours.
Yeah. They're regularly like 3 hours, but
they're super interesting. Like his show is just fascinating to listen to. Like
Joe
Rogan himself, he
doesn't
fit the mold of a typical interviewer either, because he's not afraid to voice his opinions about something.
But also he doesn't present himself as being a conveyor of any knowledge about anything.
Right, yeah, he's asking questions with his guests, and he's having the conversation.
He's just a curious guy.
Yeah.
That's it. He's just a curious guy.
Right.
He's just a curious... That's all you are. You hear that?
He's interested in stuff, and so he calls people on to talk about what...
Joe Rogan, if you'd like to sponsor the show. That'd be awesome.
Like, recently Joe Rogan had on... what's his name from the the rich guy there?
The rich guy.
Share.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
So.
Okay, he had Elon Musk on.
Okay, can we talk about the controversy with that for just a second?
Well, with the smoking pot?
Yeah, like, why are people freaking out over this? I don't understand.
I'm going to say because people are just already freaking out, and it's just another thing.
Yeah, but they're focusing on this like, I think he might have taken, I haven't seen the clip yet, but from what I hear, he took a toke of a joint.
Yes.
And that was it.
Yeah,
it did look like a big joint.
And then
it was a doozy.
And then they said that some falling in his stock prices were attributable to him just taking a toke on the show.
Right.
And I wonder if it's because there's like a conservative strain or something in the shareholders that are like, the CEO has to pretend not to be a human, and
that's plausible, I would say. I think that's not beyond.
Or was it just that the stocks were already falling and it had nothing to do with that?
I don't know. Really have
there
no
did
idea.
seem to be some negative reactions.
The media wanted to draw a line between those.
Yeah, there was a definite blowback after that 1 second of the 3-hour podcast.
Okay.
Can I ask, was he claiming this was the first time he ever smoked pot, or
no? Actually, he was claiming the opposite. He said, "Yeah, I've smoked before," although I don't know. It looked a little contrived. he makes this face.
Yeah. Can you see that face, everyone, on the microphone?
Yeah. I think everyone knows what face he made.
Yeah, I made the Elon Musk face.
Yeah, it was the face that was plastered all over every story that ran about this particular incident, if you can call it an incident.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like Grumpy Cat.
A little bit. A little bit. But anyway, you had a point to make about his appearance on the show.
Right, so
get with it.
Joe Rogan had this guy on the show, and while he's obviously an interesting figure, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan is also just kind of like, he's more of an audience member to the guy being on his show, rather than like a peer engager making this interview together.
It's like the Q&A session after a talk or something.
Yeah, exactly. More like an audience member Q&A kind of thing. And Joe Rogan's like expressions and reactions, they seem kind of like, okay, this is actually just kind of a weird guy, and I'm not sure if I'm on the same page as this guy. You kind of see him. Like,
weren't you saying that you realize Elon Musk might be a little, autistic or something like that? Like he's socially awkward.
He's definitely introverted, and he's not, he's not the type of person to just. Which is weird because he appeared on Joe Rogan's show, which is just like all over the damn place. For an introvert to go out and do that, cool, good on you, Elon.
Well, I think he's an introvert that wants to be social.
Yeah.
But, and I don't even know that introvert is the right word. I think he's just a socially awkward kind of geek.
Yeah.
That got the money to be able to afford a hairpiece. And
have you seen some of those old photos
a
of
gym
Elon Musk?
trainer to make him not look like a geek. Yeah, I've seen the early picture.
Yeah. So sure,
and
sold PayPal, got a hairpiece.
And so while he's now allowed to join in those like popular circles and stuff,
I'm cool now.
He doesn't actually fit in because the inside of him, his personality and stuff, is just not that kind of socially adept kind of social butterfly or whatever.
So a lot of my focus is going to be on during this episode is going to be on Sam Harris because he's the one I'm more familiar with.
You love him.
I'm a Sam Harris fan.
You would kiss him.
I have a man crush on Sam Harris. I'm not going to. I'm not afraid of admitting that. He looks like Ben Stiller, which is kind of funny. But
there's an intellectual dark web website.
There is. Yes.
Too. Is it
This would make sense.
Eric Weinstein that made the website?
I don't know who made it, but it we'll post the link to the.
Eric Weinstein is the guy that coined the name, right?
Is that what I said? Yes.
I think you said that.
I did.
Oh, it must be true then. Mark said it.
No, it was Brett Weinstein. Oh, sorry. No, okay, no, Brett. It was coined by Eric.
Okay, I was going to say Bretts don't usually do good things.
I tend to agree a lot more with the brother Brett, actually, the one that was embroiled in the
the protests.
Yeah, in the protests, the Evergreen College.
The only Brett I know is Flight of the Conchords. That's my
Flight of the Conchords is one of the two guys named Brett.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's not Weinstein though.
No.
Okay. No.
Just want to make sure he's not moonlighting as member of the Flight of the Conchords. Okay, so you agree more with Brett's?
Yeah,
you love Brett. Like you want to give Brett kisses.
Yeah, pretty much. He's not a bad looking guy. If I were of that persuasion, I suppose.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Seinfeld quote.
But he's totally like in the thread, sort of like you can genealogically kind of connect him with that thread of people like Richard Dawkins and because he's an evolutionary biologist, right?
Right.
So he fits right in with that gang of intellectuals that kind of blew up or became a thing in the early 2000s after all those atheist books came out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he specifically is an atheist. I think he is. I think he is, but I think he's said explicitly that he was.
I think he has, but I don't know if he's written any books or like.
I don't. Yeah, that's not the main thing about what he talks about. He's just an evolutionary biologist,
right?
Or, evolutionary biologist, and and so this whole thing that blew up with him that kind of thrust him into this group of public academics or intellectuals, or not even public intellectuals, because I wouldn't call Joe Rogan or Dave Rubin an intellectual, but these sort of public people who are interested in intellectual things. He kind of got thrust into it because he wasn't going along with a trend in left-wing thought that he's actually a part of. Mm-hmm. So like this whole university thing that happened where there were these kids, these students that I guess are just learning what it is to be politically active and stuff. They just decided that it doesn't matter if you do a pendulum swing. It's not about actually thinking about what the right thing to do is. They just wanted to do the opposite of what was identified as a bad thing.
Right.
So they see
we're talking like dialectic Hegelian stuff.
I guess so, and these students are completely naive to it, but they also seem to be dictating even to the educators or the administrators of universities and educational institutions. They seem to be dictating what the nature of the zeitgeist is going to be in terms of intellectual kind of culture on campus. Whereas campuses, like when I was going to school, were very much sort of like this testing ground, or this place where kids get to go and try out something and fail at it. They get to go up and say something wrong to be able to be presented with why they're wrong, and then learn how to get to the right thing, or to come up with what's right, but at least be presented with with the kind of attacks that their position might see, so kids like do these debates and stuff in university, but you can't really do that now because it seems like now in university the default now is that there are some sort of base orthodoxies that you have to follow. And if you go outside of that, then
you're suddenly Jordan Peterson.
There will be protests and
you're a jerk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Talks will be shut down and people will be expelled and
so victim of the politically correct movement, I guess.
Yeah, if there's one underlying theme that runs through this entire group of people who belong to the intellectual dark web, it's their disdain for, if you want to call it that, for political correctness and their staunch advocacy for free speech. Because, like you were just talking about, they see everything going on at university campuses as detrimental to furthering ideas. Because originally, universities were supposed to be incubators of ideas. You were supposed to be able to freely express any kind of opinion, any kind of thought, and have that idea discussed in a civilized manner.
Yeah.
And now you have things like safe spaces where, or trigger warnings and all this other stuff where you're not any topic that might be deemed controversial is off limits, and you ruin your career by bringing it up in a class if you're a professor, for example, right?
Yeah.
And this is what the intellectual dark web is pushing back against to a certain degree.
Yeah, and it's not well. Actually, to me, it's not that they're pushing back against anything necessarily. The dark web was like this kind of joke name that the intellectual dark web was like a joke name that Eric Weinstein came up with because these guys have kind of been relegated to a fringe despite them actually representing more kind of centrist kind of political flavors.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like an odd kind of paradox. So the right wingers can't include them with them because they don't actually espouse any of the ideas of racism and quote economic anxiety unquote all that kind of stuff. Like they a lot of the members that are associated with the intellectual dark web are actually speaking explicitly against like this new rise of the alt-right and against Trump and against the right wing throughout their careers and all the time. And Sam Harris is, like you said, the like at the vanguard of that kind of stuff. His podcast has been about decrying Trump consistently, and but they're also rejected by the left because they're seen to be sort of like Trojan horses for the right. Yeah. Because they're not as vociferously against them. They're not willing to say it's automatically justified to punch a neo-Nazi just because you're made aware that they're a neo-Nazi.
All right. Let's focus on the racism thing for a second, because this is one that comes up a lot in terms of people pushing back or decrying the intellectual dark web. I'm gonna focus on Sam Harris as the example because I'm more familiar with him. But if you remember his appearance on Bill Maher's show, where he appeared with Ben Affleck.
Yeah, with him and Ben Affleck. Yeah,
and they just got into it. Like Affleck was just adamant about labeling Harris a bigot and an Islamophobe and a racist. Yeah. Because Harris tends to criticize Islam as being full of bad ideas. Yeah. Which, arguably, it is. There are bad ideas baked into this religion, right? Yeah. Just like there are bad ideas built into every other religion.
But ultimately, he's using it as just the most prominent current example of the bad idea that is religion generally, because he's not pulling back punches or sparing Christianity or Judaism or other.
So he's attacking
other
dogma.
religion. He's attacking dogma.
Right.
Yes.
And the results of that. He's not only attacking the dogma itself. He's attacking what that dogma does to people. Sure. And what he's attacking dogma as a motivator for all these atrocious acts that are committed. And Ben Affleck is using that as a an excuse to call him a bigot and a racist, and an Islamophobe,
And I take that just as being Ben Affleck serving as a useful idiot for whoever came up with things like the term Islamophobia, which pretty much didn't exist before 2005 because there were already perfectly adequate terms to describe that, such as bigotry or racism or prejudice. There are already terms for what Islamophobia pretends to want to describe, but it's used explicitly to make a special case out of this religious doctrine and orthodoxy. To make any criticism on an honest, rational level of the religion's doctrine be equivocated with a bigoted attack on the people who would identify themselves with that religion.
And I think what caused...
So there's a dirty trick there with that term, and people like Ben Affleck have just sort of naively accepted that it's an honest thing. So anytime you attack the religion of Islam, you're committing an act of racism,
right? And
because they've successfully been brainwashed to accept that equivocation,
right? And that's another common thread that runs through the opposition to the intellectual dark web, and the result being they're all a bunch of alt-right racists and stuff. It's because what spurred the debate on Bill Maher's show between Harris and Affleck was the fact that Harris was saying that we should be free to criticize bad ideas.
Yeah.
And Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas, is what he said.
Yeah.
And that just, you're a racist, you're a bigot. Like, no, he's just, there are bad ideas.
So this is Ben Affleck
it's
saying
encoded conservative religious totalitarianism. Like, it's, like, how can you not think it's a bad idea?
Right, yeah. The underlying point, though, we should be free to criticize bad ideas, that we should be.
Yeah.
We absolutely should be. Like, why does Islam or any other religion enjoy a special privilege that, puts it beyond the scope of criticism?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're reaching a point where it's becoming...
Like, that's the problem with, like, these blasphemy laws, too, like, that are, that actually... Did they actually enact a new blasphemy law in recent years in Ireland? Or had they killed one? I can't remember. But anyway, it's still an issue.
The Holocaust denying laws in Germany, for example, right? Like, as soon as you legislate thought, that's a bad idea. Like, and that's what people like Jordan Peterson pushed back against whenever he was arguing against the transgender bill. You can't tell me what to think or what to say. The government should not be in a position to do that.
Right. Yeah. But there's sort of like a fine line, I guess, when it comes to more sort of explicit expressions of the actual thing that that terms like Islamophobia pretend not to be. So like I was saying, that it's a dishonest term because it pretends... It pretends to be about bigotry and racism and to be something that decries that, but it works by being usable or a tool to be able to attack anything that aren't those things, right. that you can just easily conflate with being something about bigotry. So when it comes to something more explicit, like Holocaust denial, like is it Keekstra, the Canadian Supreme Court case that was...
I'm not sure.
That was used. So there was a famous Supreme Court case in Canada that was used to prosecute a teacher, I think in Saskatchewan or Alberta, who was actually teaching the students in his high school class or something.
Oh, I remember this.
That the Holocaust hadn't happened, or he was giving out some literature, like pamphlet or something like that.
Where was this?
Somewhere out west.
Yeah. So
Westish prairies, you know.
So in Canadian law, we do allow for being able to shut down, like, explicitly disinforming and hateful.
Well, I think
like that.
there's a distinction to be made between teaching
and I
misinformation.
think there's a reasonable justification for Canada.
Are you talking about our hate speech laws?
Yeah, for Canada's legal position on that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So and I don't know. It's hard. It's complicated, and I'm not sure if I can articulate well where the line is. But generally, you want to allow for free speech. But I can see that it's possible to conceive of some limits.
Yeah. I mean, free speech...
And I don't think most of the intellectual dark web are against that. I don't think they're all necessarily...
So you don't think they're all
free speech absolutists.
Right. They're not all for this libertarian idea of free speech where you can say anything without consequence. I don't think that's true at all either.
Yeah.
Like, free speech is not without consequence. You can say and think and whatever the fuck you want because we live in a free democratic society, but that doesn't protect you against the ramifications of what you say. Like, if you say something racist... you might get your ass kicked, and sorry, but free speech doesn't cover protecting you against getting your ass kicked for what you say.
No, but assault and battery laws do.
Sure, yeah, but and they're two distinct, you know, sets of laws, right? Yeah. But yeah, I don't think they're arguing for that idea of libertarian free speech by any means. They're arguing for the idea.
Some of them are. Some of them
might
like Dave Rubin would, for example.
I don't know. I've never heard him speak about that type of thing specifically.
I think I think he's always.
You may have. I just haven't.
And he's become. He started off being more, like claiming to be a left winger or claiming to be a liberal.
Yeah.
And now he
put out
makes
a
that
video saying why
special point.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
So, but now he makes a special point of calling himself a classical liberal.
Right.
And I hate that too because I find that a dishonest term because it's like a co-opting of the term liberal by rightists who want to, by alt-righters or whatever, who want to claim some kind of legitimacy or reasonableness to their positions.
So the Trojan horse thing again.
That's So there's a paradox there, or maybe even a hypocrisy. Maybe we can tease it out a little bit here. But yeah, like they argue that. Well, some of them anyway. They argue that free speech should be a cornerstone of democracy, which it should be, absolutely. Well,
but at the same time, like I said, there are consequences.
But even prior to being a cornerstone of democracy, I think a lot of them are just saying that it's essential to education.
Okay.
Like the dialogue must continue. We can't cut off the dialogue.
That's it. You can't learn how or why you're wrong, and you can't learn how or why you're right if you prevent in the place where you're supposed to be doing that learning, you prevent any type of dialogue or any type of of presenting of
well, that's been the problem with
the
the
multiple sides of an issue.
The political correct movement is that it assumes that it knows the truth,
right,
and the only truth, and that anything else presented is violating it or something like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I guess to a degree, I can understand where you're coming from on that, but I just lost. Thanks, Jill. Lost my train of thought there.
Trying to be very subtle.
What was I gonna say?
Sorry,
it was going to be really good.
I don't know. Fuck. Okay, I lost it. Keep going.
Rewind.
No rewinding. Luke, what is your position on the whole free speech?
That was it. Yeah. Okay. So
never mind, Luke.
Mark's got it.
I'm back, guys. It's this idea of deplatforming because of political correctness. We're seeing that a lot more frequently at universities, and that it prevents ideas from being openly and honestly discussed. Mm-hmm. I do not agree with someone being deplatformed because you happen to disagree with their position. If someone is espousing bad ideas, the way to counter that is with better ideas, and
you refute it.
Yeah, you refute
with
it.
sound argument.
I find often the thing going on with these conversations is that they're having different conversations. Like this whole the Jordan Peterson thing, for
that's
example.
because of
they're having a different.
They're
saying
talking
something
past
else.
each other.
Yeah, they're talking past each other and through each other.
In a lot of cases, they are talking past each other, but it's also because in some situations, it's because they're not defining what they're talking about at the outset. It's really important to define your terms before you have a conversation with somebody about that term.
Well, that's right. Yeah, before you can even talk, there needs to be agreements already made.
Right.
In a sense.
Yeah. So Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson recently did a debate in Vancouver.
Are you talking about the 2-day?
Yeah, the 2-day talk that or conversation. I guess it wasn't like a formalized debate.
Yeah, it was hosted by one of the Weinsteins.
Yeah, by Brett, and Brett was basically acting as a moderator between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson.
A Brett was doing this.
A Brett, is that what I said?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the Bretts.
Okay.
Yeah. And
a Brett like Weinstein.
And Jordan Peterson started off the talk by
putting everyone to sleep.
No, by saying that he'd like to start off the talk with them stating what the other person's position is in a way that the other person can only agree that that's what their position is.
I thought that was a really good way to start the conversation.
Like that seems like a good rule of thumb for any type of
so what do you think
of discussion.
So I'm going to tell you what I think your position is, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong.
You can tell me where I got it wrong, and then I'll restate back so that I get on what you actually want to say.
And this happened on day 2 of the conversation.
Oh, that wasn't at the beginning of the first one?
No, the first one was like more of an open dialogue, and then at the end of it they left off on a point where, okay, we'll pick this up tomorrow, and that's on day 2 where they decided, okay, well, Jordan Peterson decided, let's state each other's positions and see if we have it right or wrong. They did something similar on the first day, but the second day opened with that idea.
Okay.
But yeah, like that. Now I think for the most part, both of them got the other's position more or less correctly, from what I remember. This was a couple of weeks ago when I saw it, but like it's a really great concept. It's a good way to keep the conversation.
Yeah, because you know that you want to know that the argument of disagreement that you're going to present is actually relevant to what the other guy's argument actually is. Right? You don't want to like straw manning while it's rhetorically compelling to a third party audience maybe who's easily duped by that kind of trick. It's completely irrelevant to the actual
discussion.
It's kind of sussing, like hashing out of a disagreement.
Right.
Like what you want to do is to actually be able to disagree with exactly what the other guy's position actually is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's seriously lacking in a lot of the mainstream media kind of like 3-minute talking head soundbite things that we get. Like they don't have time to present their actual position, and both people are just reacting to one another, and you can't have an intelligent dialogue like that.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it would take days to get anywhere. Well,
in the case of like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, it would take a couple
months.
Yeah, like they've had repeated Jordan and Sam have had repeated conversations because they keep pulling out little bits and pieces of what the other person is saying, and if they disagree with them or if they even agree with them. Like for one of the first times they talked was on Harris's podcast. And originally they were talking about something completely different. The point of the show was to talk about, I can't remember what the topic was, but they eventually got into this. They got to a point where they couldn't get over what the other meant by truth.
Oh yes.
And the 2 hours of this podcast was just them bickering about what the definition of truth is. Yeah. You know, and that again is why it's important to lay out and establish your definitions at the outset, so you can have an intelligent conversation about the actual topic, rather than just going back and forth and talking over each other like you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that a lot of people just don't do, and that does not lead to any kind of outcome. It's just noise at that point.
Yeah.
This is the absence of noise. Long silence there.
Well, wasn't even all that long, really.
Yep.
It was just that we all looked at each other and went, yeah.
Yeah. Let's meditate.
Let's let that stew for a second. But yeah, definitions are important. You know, we have an upcoming episode about morality, and it'll be very important for us to define what we mean by morality before we get into the conversation.
The problem is people... Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it becomes an endless conversation, really. Because we can keep on going back and...
But it's
and
more
defining.
endless if you don't do the defining. Or the...
You're right. It's a different endless. Because one is...
A different endless.
It's our new book.
Yeah.
Different.
Endless.
Critical different endless.
Well, yeah, like I said in the intro, it's about having a rolling conversation. Just because they appear on a particular episode of one of the other's podcasts doesn't mean that conversation is over. It just means they've talked about it, and they may pick it up again later on.
Well, let's define conversation. I guess conversation... Because you can have a conversation where two people are talking with each other.
Right.
Whereas you can also be talking at someone and nothing is penetrating anything. It isn't a conversation. It is just two people talking at each other, which is, for example, the Jordan Peterson with the students thing. Like, they were talking at each other. There was no conversation there.
Yeah, no.
They were just saying different things and moving on to different points and never understanding each other. I felt it odd that Jordan Peterson never really stopped it and mentioned it even.
What do you mean? Stopped what?
Never stopped the conversation to pull back and go, you're talking about this, I'm talking about this. I suppose he tried. And it didn't really...
Wait, with the Sam Harris conversation? Or
No, forget it. I'm talking
you
about
mean
the
with the
students?
students?
Yeah, I'm talking about the
yeah.
students. Just because I saw that interview. I saw a few interviews.
Are you talking about the clip?
So
like the one clip where he's refusing to use the pronouns?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's just being hated. And I not to say I don't hate him, but
is that the one where he's speaking outside? Like he's speaking just outside of one of the...
I think this
one
was
of the university buildings.
You're asking which interview?
Yeah.
I saw? I think this may have been on TVO even or something like that. I don't know where I saw this interview.
Oh, okay.
It was whatever. I'm talking. Why did you guys let this happen?
That's a good point. I mean, yeah. In that particular conversation, that particular encounter, I guess,
it wasn't a conversation.
Yeah,
there's no conversation there.
They were talking over each other, and I think you're right. Like, he didn't stop and say, like, this is what I mean, and like.
Well, I suppose he did. It just wasn't heard.
Okay, sure.
It wasn't understood.
Right. Mm-hmm. Go on.
No, there's no go on. That's it.
Oh, all right.
That's the end of the
I think that
final thought.
No. I think that characterizes a lot of these sort of descriptions of the members of the intellectual dark web by either end of the spectrum as being the opposite end of the spectrum. So, like, a lot of left wingers, like you acknowledged earlier, just call them all right-wing racists, right? Because they won't just comply with some kind of orthodoxy of
they won't follow the mainstream narrative.
Yeah, they won't follow the mainstream narrative of you're not allowed to investigate any biological differences between populations that have a different
that's
racial
ridiculous.
profile or something. You're not allowed to investigate it because the consequences can actually be racist. Because
Luke reacted to that. I want to get more of this.
Sorry, what?
So no, continue that train of thought. I want to
pull
this out a little bit more.
And what do you think of that? No. That you can't even look at it.
No, you can't. No, yeah.
But I suppose
because you should know off the bat that it's racist.
But the truth is, there is something to be there's something to be said for that, because it's kind of like creating the knowledge to create an atom bomb, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have the social responsibility.
That's the perfect analogy.
There is ill will, and so we can't actually present this because bad people will do something bad with this.
Sam Harris had another similar example to that, where he says that there should be certain bits of knowledge that should be off limits. Like should we pursue, or should we make it publicly, the formula for smallpox? Should we make that publicly available, just because it's a bit of knowledge? Like you said, there's going to be some faction that will take advantage of that openness. So should that be off limits? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that particular question, but it's along the same lines as where you're going with that one, with the atom bomb.
Yeah.
So
I think that there are reasonable limits to be drawn, and I think there's a bit of just sort of a hasty kind of heuristic happening, where people are seeing that racist ideologues can take advantage of certain types of information or certain types of conversations even. And they're saying because a racist can take advantage of sort of not necessarily racist piece of information, then that piece of information does become necessarily racist just because some other racist can take advantage of it.
The example I'm going to give that backs that up is Stefan Molyneux's focus on the differences in IQ between cultures. A lot of people are glomming onto that and just calling him flat out a racist because he's kind of studying or focused on this idea that different cultures have varying levels of IQ, right?
Yeah. But cultures, there's like so many variables that go into cultures, because cultures are broadly delineated geographically. Sure. They have different governments. They have different economies.
Yeah, well, without getting into the meat of it, but
sure.
But
he'll ascribe it. Stefan Molyneux, specifically, he will attribute it directly to race, though, won't he?
I don't know. I just know offhand that he's kind of focused on the differences in IQ between cultures, and people are reacting to that, saying, that could be opening the door to racism,
right?
Because as soon as you say that a certain culture has a higher propensity toward more IQ points than another, then you leave the door open for saying that culture is superior to anyone who doesn't meet that threshold.
Yeah.
Just like you were saying with the whole, they're taking an aspect that some people might attribute, some racists might take advantage of, for example, and they're saying this type of thing will lead to racism.
Yeah.
So the real problem, though, is the ill will there initially.
It's not only ill will; it's also the knee-jerk reactionism that comes along with it.
But also, I like that actually, because there is like this trend of treating as irrelevant the intention behind statements or actions, and it's sort of in line with an ends justify the means model of reality and thought, right? But it's kind of reversed. So if the ends can conceivably go towards something unethical and like racism and racist policy, then sort of like in an upside down kind of calculus there, then that means you can't you can't explore the means because the ends
are racist, for example.
Might be racist.
Right. And that's not something I necessarily agree with. I think ideas should be explored. Whether or not there should be limits to the kinds of knowledge that are available, though, that's something I'd have to think about. Like with the atom bomb idea or the weaponized smallpox idea. Like, that knowledge we should be able to explore it, but whether or not it should be made publicly available because it might be taken advantage of, I don't know.
It's like to say good people should be able to explore it, bad people shouldn't.
See that? Yeah, and then who gets to determine which people are good and
people.
Which are bad? Yeah.
Good people get to decide.
Good people get to decide. Yeah.
It's so simple. Why haven't we just arranged society this way?
Well, I just think...
Why isn't civilization just led by the
good people? That's right. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Let's do that tomorrow.
Let's do that tomorrow? Okay. Anyone who wants to sign up can join us on Parliament Hill
But
tomorrow.
you've got to be good.
Gotta be a good person,
Only
though.
good
Yeah.
people.
So
There will be goodness tests.
If
Goodness.
you're not good, send over
Jordan, you're right.
the next person you know is good.
Okay, so I wanna talk about your particular fixation on hating on Peterson today.
No. I don't hate anyone really.
I do.
I can't say that I do. No. I
I
feel
think
that
I can hate people.
Can or do?
Can. I'm not sure if I literally hate anyone yet.
I
But
think
I
that people
feel
are.
like there's a latency in me.
There's
I tend to
there's
think
that
people are
possibility.
confused, and so I can't hate people for being confused. You know,
I
even
mean,
if
I-
someone is
I-
very
Hold
wrong.
on. What about people who are not confused? People who have actually...
I think they're confused as well,
No, hold on.
'cause-
Just a second. People who've, like, fully fleshed out a given position. Let's say they've thought about... This is going to sound stupid because I can't justify it, but let's say they can justify their racism somehow. They found a reasonable way to justify their racism, which they've actually considered, and they're not confused about it. Would you be able to hate that person?
No, I would still see them as being confused. Even if they don't feel confused, they're still confused. Like, to think that they have some sort of final knowledge that accumulates for everything and they have all the variables,
final
that's just
knowledge.
preposterous.
What the fuck is final knowledge?
Well, this is what I mean, exactly. There is no final knowledge. There's no
Sounds a
final
little too
word.
close to final solution. I don't know.
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm saying that is confused right there. To think that you can settle on a final thought of some sort, you know, that's you're just confused. I'm not saying there's anything even wrong with being confused. Be nice about being confused, though.
I don't even
Be
know where I
kind.
was going with that question, so that's...
I don't know. I mean, that's a hypothetical that I just
Sure,
can't imagine.
yeah, I
It's-
don't know.
So regarding like leftists calling any member of the intellectual dark web racist, right winger,
Right.
I think it pretty much boils down to a kind of laziness. They want to be able to use a heuristic that allows them to quickly stereotype or categorize
just-
people as like,
I would
okay, you're in the good column, you're in the
Yeah.
bad column, you're in the good column.
People
you're in
want
the
to
bad
settle
column.
into their
I
dogma
would
and go, I'm comfy.
I would expand on that a little bit and say that it's not only lazy, it's also lazy us versus them mentality.
Yes, yeah.
You know, it's, if you're not against...
Which actually is a lot more in line with right-wing authoritarian
Yeah.
thought, which is sort of characterized by this kind of xenophobia and in-group,
the
out-group
in-group,
kinda-
out-group mentality. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I don't know if they realize just how close to the enemy, or the quote-unquote enemy, that their perceived enemy, that they're getting to whenever they're doing this kind of reactionary thing. You know, it's... You're either with us or you're against us. You're either
Right.
You're either
I couldn't.
You're either
believe
with Antifa or you're a fascist.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when George Bush actually had used that phrase literally, like after 9/11, and when he was justifying when he was trying to whip up a bunch of other countries to go with him into Iraq.
You're either with us or you're with the terrorists.
Yeah.
And it was that
Like-
same kind of line was used again. I can't remember by whom, but I think was it Cheney who's like,
Well,
you're either with us or no. It was
was-
here in Canada it was a few years ago during the Harper era. It was Vic Taves. You're either with us or you're with the child molesters.
With the child molesters, yeah.
Yeah, like-
yeah, but then he presented a bill that was explicitly called like the bill against child molesters, when really what it was a bill against online privacy.
Yeah.
Against,
It's like what?
Yeah, no, suddenly people that accidentally download child pornography are put in prison, and whereas they would have gotten a fine before that.
Sorry, what? What did you say?
Never mind.
Wait, what?
Wait, what?
But yeah, it's
That's like Orrin Hatch this week. Somebody told him what Trump said about like
Puerto
Trump
Rico thing?
being in total denial about
Puerto
the,
Rico.
Yeah, about
Yeah.
the Puerto Rican death toll after the hurricane. He claimed that the death toll that's those numbers are all just made up to make me look bad, and it's all about me.
1,000 people didn't die. It was
And
all
then
made
Orrin
up.
Hatch, this like old Republican guy.
He double taked?
He's
Whoa,
asked
what?
a question by a reporter about those statements from Trump on Twitter, and he's like, wait, say that again? He just does a total double take. this old guy who's a total turd, but at least he had some kind of right in. We got like a glimpse of him having
the proper intuition,
right intuition there.
Wait,
he wasn't able to hide it.
He was not able to hide it.
He said, "What?" Yeah, it's lazy classification. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either yeah.
Could we say that in a sense there's this idea that and I think it's a false idea that we can settle into knowledge, that we can get comfortable in a dogma and sit back and relax and we've got it all figured out kind of thing.
I don't know if it's necessarily knowledge as it is potential certainty though.
Well, I think there's something interesting there.
Thanks, Jill.
No,
love you too.
Because a lot of the time, I think people want to be able to categorize people on like an intellectual, on a political spectrum or a political quadrant by sort of enumerating things that they're solid on. You know.
Yeah, like I'm for smaller government. I don't believe in.
Are you for abortion rights?
Yeah.
Are you
for equality?
Are you for universal health care?
Right.
Like there's like a list of items that depending on what side of the issue you're on, that makes you a left winger or a right winger. Mm-hmm. And if you're ambiguous on any specific issue, then each side can throw you to the lions of the other side, or vice versa.
And we see this happening a lot in the intellectual dark web circle, because the group itself, if you want to call it a group, I'm saying if you want to call it a lot in this episode, but they're from all kinds of different political affiliations.
Yeah. And okay,
yeah,
keep going. Sorry, that was a little too enthusiastic.
Yes, yes, they are. And so a lot of people who are outside of this group and just looking at it superficially can be like, well, I don't know where Ben Shapiro stands on the issue of whatever.
I don't know where Ben Shapiro stands.
Just to kind of back up your point there.
Okay, yeah, let's go back to that.
Okay, let's talk about Ben Shapiro for a second.
So not even just Ben Shapiro, but
okay.
but let's start with Ben Shapiro. So first off, more broadly, I think that it's not a good idea that they're embracing this kind of like being lumped together because they're not exactly vetting anyone who's being lumped in with that very, very small and limited group. I mean, I think on a personal level, each of these guys or women, each of these men or women have encountered
or Brett.
a few of the other ones in different contexts, and maybe on a personal level they were able to have a cordial or fruitful kind of debate or exchange of ideas, and so that's why they're not going to gatekeep. But at the same time, I think they're kind of just letting other people
label them.
Other people kind of associate them with ideas that they don't represent, but they're being allowed to be claimed to be representing those ideas. So with someone like Ben Shapiro, for example, I pretty much see Ben Shapiro as just a new media version of Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, nice.
So he's a young millennial, so he's there to make very, very anti-progressive, regressive kind of conservatism look reasonable to a new generation, right. To a younger generation. Most of the shit that he puts out on his online network, is it the Daily Wire or the Daily Caller?
It's the Daily Wire, I think.
The Daily Wire?
I think so.
The Daily, they're pretty much identical in terms of the bullshit that they put out. It's all fucking Republican apologist stuff that demonizes anyone who's not Republican, demonizes the any Democrat wholesale, and so it's utterly the opposite of honest sort of representation of the facts. You know, that like these are propaganda outlets, and sorry, what's his name?
Brett.
No. Who are we talking about here? The
Ben Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro.
It was the Daily Wire, by the way.
The Daily Wire.
Yeah.
Okay. And while he goes on to shows like Dave Rubin's, to sort of reach out to people who might be sort of vulnerable to being dragged into right-wingism through the alt-right and through sort of the reasonableness that Dave Rubin kind of presents in terms of just wanting to interview people and at least expose you to what their actual arguments are, which I get, but ultimately, when you look at what Ben Shapiro is actually saying in his show on YouTube or whatever, and in his Daily Wire publication website, it's all dishonest stuff that is not in the spirit of that intellectual dark web kind of.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see. Because of that, I see Shapiro as being kind of on the fringe of the intellectual dark web circle. You know, he's lumped into that same category because of the new media aspect of what he's presenting and just the type of conversation.
But a lot of young people are thinking he's a reasonable. He's a reasonable guy, or he's just exposing the reasonableness that exists in right wing,
which they're wrong about,
which they're just completely wrong about. But they think it's true because someone who's ambiguous about their political leanings, like Dave Rubin, are willing to give him a platform, despite his own platform being completely contrary to that spirit.
That's a fair point. I don't know enough about, like, I tend to stay away from Ben Shapiro just because I don't really like what he says, so I don't, by extension, know too much about the rest of his statements on things, so I can't really speak to that. But yeah, from what you're saying, from what I've heard of him, it is dishonest, what he's presenting.
Do you guys remember a few years ago, there was this, like, 12-year-old kid that was at the conservative convention there in the States? I can't remember what it's called, but there's like a big convention of conservatives and
was it the RNC, or is it
no? It wasn't
else?
the RNC. It was another.
What about the 12-year-old kid? What?
So there was this 12-year-old kid that was given the stage basically to do like a speech, and he basically like laid out all of the usual kind of conservative talking points and stuff, but because those talking points were coming from a kid spoken because he was like well trained, or he well trained himself to be able to do an oral presentation very confidently.
Right.
At 12 years old, the kid was like presented as a prodigy, and
oh really?
And again, he was kind of used as something to make conservatism palatable to a younger generation, right?
Right.
And I kind of see
so Shapiro might be kind of
Shapiro a little bit like that. He's like a millennial guy who's spewing all of the usual talking points, but he's from a younger generation, and so
he's more
they're
relatable.
Like, yes, let's like fucking throw all of our cash behind this guy because
he can relate
because
to the younger
he's
generation.
young. This will bloom.
He's feeding that alt-right, you know, and and that's a big movement that's kind of bringing the Tea Party
conservative boy band
outside of just the middle-aged weirdos that were hanging tea bags from their hats, and he's getting young guys who are trying to get engaged politically and civically, but don't really know where to start. He's a very palatable thing for them because he's young, but he's confident, and he's like,
I think Sam Harris has kind of gone after Ben Shapiro about that kind of intellectual dishonesty on a few occasions. Again, I tend to stay away from that. I haven't heard the discussion itself, but from what I remember seeing about it, he was saying how he's not honest in his presentation of this type of thing. But I think you're right. He is appealing to a younger generation because he sounds articulate. The way that he presents these ideas is very, very articulate. The way he speaks, the way he presents everything is relatable to that younger generation. He sounds confident. He presents it well on the surface. But when you dig deep enough, it kind of falls apart.
Mm.
I mean, let's just look at some of the headlines on the Daily Wire.
Oh, geez, yeah, that's so fun.
Website, and so I find it, like, frankly kind of offensive that this guy is thrown in with people like Steven Pinker, who are completely
Michael Shermer,
who are completely like almost anti-partisan.
Right.
in terms of what they put out there, they're not. They're never advocating for one political side or another. Okay, so Daily Wire here. CNN wonders what the meaning of the word pretext is. Let's see.
Ding, ding,
Professor
ding.
who defended students' right to an opinion returns to work after 3 years and one major court battle. Prager, Dennis Prager is another one we should talk about. Prager, but he's not in the intellectual dark web.
God, no.
Which I don't know why, because honestly, I don't really see much of a difference between
Prager and
Shapiro.
No, I think that's
it's just that Prager is not a millennial.
No.
If Prager were a millennial, he would be considered...
He would be Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, he would be Ben Shapiro. Is the president a bad role model for children? Actually, this undermines my point.
Have you heard the debate between Matt Dillahunty and Dennis Prager, by the way?
Oh, look,
this isn't working.
There's an article on the Daily Wire quoting Limbaugh.
Oh, good.
Oh, there you go.
Awesome.
Do Democrats trust midterm polling?
Okay.
So far, this isn't working though, Gilles.
No,
you're not presenting anything.
I was sure I was. You know what I should have done? I should have gone to Reddit and found which Daily Wire articles they're posting on Reddit.
I think you're spreading Ben Shapiro propaganda, Gilles,
I'm
any true
spreading
facts
Yeah.
On that note, final thoughts on the issue of the intellectual dark web. Luke, I want to hear from you first.
New York Times, Dems,
Okay,
David Hogg, slam Nikki Haley for $52,000 curtains. Haley, there's just one big problem. I'm going to tell you why it's all justified.
Clickbait. Okay, we're done. We're done. We're done, Jill. Okay, we're done.
Already?
Luke, final thoughts.
Well, my final thought is that there should be no final thoughts, right? It's all about keeping the dialogue going.
I hate final thoughts. This is the part of the show I hate the most.
We hate saying goodbye. But no, keep the dialogue going, right? That's what
Prepare to die, leftists' heads explode over Trump alert.
Is that a headline?
Yeah, that's one of the Daily
Heads
Wire
explode.
headlines.
Oh my God.
Leftists. They use the word leftists.
I think I used the word leftist too, but it was in a different context.
In a headline?
Not so much. Okay, go on. You don't like final thoughts? Because we should keep the conversation going.
Yeah, right,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah.
There are no final thoughts. Like this episode would just keep on going. And it really only falls victim to our lack of having more info. And
Well, that and my hard drive space is going to fill up soon.
I don't know, yeah. The dark web, it sounds like it's a big mishmash of all sorts of different things, and we've defined it as dark web. these people have things in common, things not in common. I don't know.
I think the only thing they have in common, though, is that
The format?
no,
The
is
medium?
is that they won't sort of bend to any movement's kind of dogma or something like that. Like they're willing to entertain an idea as long as it takes to actually critically evaluate it.
Okay, and not enter into dogma?
Whereas they're against the kind of people who are all about preemptively holding up ideas and ideals, and calling anyone who doesn't immediately submit to those as sort of being blasphemers or being on the opposite end of the spectrum from themselves.
Fair. As for myself, I like it. I like this whole loose-knit gathering of public intellectuals having honest conversations with each other and others. I think it's a really important thing to have, especially in today's society. Where mainstream media is only portraying certain segments of a potential discussion that could be had if they were honest enough to portray both sides of the discussion as they should be portrayed, more in context, and have a discussion, have a full-fledged, honest conversation is, I think, what they're doing within this IDW circle, and I think that's really important to be had these days. And I think, like we said at the opening of the show, that our ideas and the way we present them and the format of our show is kind of in keeping with that entire reasoning behind the IDW. And if it were possible to get a membership card to it, please send us one.
No Bretts.
Luke doesn't like Bretts.
Unfortunately, we don't have Bretts.
We have no Bretts of which to speak.
Maybe I could change my name to Brett, actually.
You could be Brett.
We could do that.
I don't mind being Brett, actually.
Brett?
For the service, for the sake of the podcast.
When we say goodbye, we could all be Bretts.
Okay. This has been Critical Junction, episode 47. I'm Brett.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Brett.
As always, thanks for listening, and until next time, keep thinking critically.